There is a ghost hiding inside one of the most celebrated rap albums ever made, and that ghost just walked into a federal courthouse with paperwork. For 14 years, a voice that is not Kendrick Lamar has been living underneath Kendrick Lamar on the most explosive record of his entire career, chopped up, screwed down, buried in the mix like a secret nobody was ever supposed to notice. And the man that voice belongs to says he has never seen a dollar. Not one. No credit. No royalty check. No name in the liner notes. Nothing. And here is the part that should make everybody sit straight up in their chair. This is not some flimsy clout chase with no evidence attached. This man has the original studio stems. He has a copyright registration stamped in 2012. He had a version of the song sitting on SoundCloud months before the world ever pressed play on Good Kid, Mad City. And now a judge in the Central District of California is going to decide whether one of the most untouchable albums in hip-hop history has a stranger's fingerprint baked permanently into its DNA. Buckle up, because the deeper you read into this filing, the more uncomfortable it gets for absolutely everybody involved. Well, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Before we crack this thing open, make sure you hit that like button on the way in, share this on whatever platform you found it on, because this story right here is the kind of story the music industry prays you scroll past. A newly filed lawsuit is circling Mad City, the nuclear weapon off Kendrick Lamar's classic major label debut, an album so commercially immortal that it has been sitting on the Billboard charts for nearly 14 straight years. 14 years. And the man filing this lawsuit is not some random opportunist crawling out of the woodwork with a dream and a prayer. He is a Miami artist named Brewer, and according to the complaint, he was in the room before any of this existed. He worked on a version of this record before it was Mad City, before Kendrick Lamar ever touched it, before Compton had an anthem, before the burger stand line became one of the most quoted openings in modern rap. And a piece of what Brewer laid down in that session, a piece of his actual voice, allegedly never left the record. Now let me be crystal clear before the comment section starts cooking the wrong person. Kendrick Lamar is not a defendant in this lawsuit. Kendrick Lamar is not being accused of stealing anything. Kendrick Lamar walked into a situation that was already loaded, and the mess predates his involvement entirely. The man being sued is the producer, Axel Morgan, one half of the production crew THC, a name you have absolutely seen in the credits if you have been following TD over the last decade plus. If you have been keeping up with Kendrick Lamar, with Schoolboy Q, with the whole Top Dog camp and the LA sound as a whole, you have seen THC stamped on beats again and again. That Axel Morgan. And the accusation is simple but devastating. Brewer says he co-wrote and co-recorded a song over Morgan's production called Riding Roller Coaster back in April of 2012, that elements of his original work, including his voice, were carried into the commercially released Mad City, and that for 14 years he has received no writing credit, no royalties, and no accounting of the money this record has generated. And he wants the books opened. All of them. So let's set the table properly, because the details here matter more than the headlines. Sometime around April 2012, Brewer and Axel Morgan get together in Los Angeles. Brewer writes and records a record called Riding Roller Coaster over a beat that Morgan built. This is not a casual demo in somebody's basement. According to the filing, this is Brewer's personal studio setup, Brewer's recording equipment, Brewer writing lyrics, performing vocals, and even providing creative direction on the composition. The instrumentation, the emotional atmosphere, the arrangement, the whole sonic identity of the record. And on the other side of the glass, Morgan is making his own creative contributions. 2 cooks in 1 kitchen. The complaint is careful, extremely careful, to describe this as a joint work. Not a work for hire. Not a feature. Not a favor. A joint work where both men's contributions were merged into what the lawyers call a unitary whole. Keep that phrase in your pocket, because that phrase is the entire ballgame. Then, about a month later, May of 2012, Riding Roller Coaster goes up on SoundCloud. Public. Timestamped. Out in the world months before anybody outside the TD camp had heard a single second of the album. And somewhere in that same stretch of time, the beat travels. Kendrick Lamar hears the track and decides he wants it for the album. That part is not sinister. That is how music gets made every single day. Producers shop beats, artists fall in love with them, records transform. But here is where the story takes its turn into the dark. When the record becomes Mad City, Brewer's vocals get stripped out of the mix. Almost all of them. Almost. Because according to this lawsuit, one piece stayed. One chopped, screwed, pitched-down vocal texture, the one you can hear floating underneath Kendrick Lamar during the most famous stretch of the record. That voice, the lawsuit says, belongs to Brewer. His performance, his sound, woven into the fabric of a song that would go on to be performed at sold-out stadium tours, licensed into television shows, and streamed into eternity. And he says nobody ever told him. Nobody ever credited him. And nobody ever paid him. Now, I know exactly what a certain portion of the internet is already typing. 14 years. Why no? Why does it take a man damn near a decade and a half to file paperwork over a record this big? And, trust me, we are going to get all the way into that, because it is the single most important question in this entire case, and the filing actually has an answer for it. An answer that is either brilliant legal architecture or a very convenient story, depending on how cynical you are feeling today. But before we get to the why now, you need to understand the what. Because what this man is alleging, with documents attached, is not a vibes-based accusation. This is a date-stamped, stem-carrying, copyright-registered claim sitting in a federal court, and when you read the actual language of this complaint, you realize very quickly that this is not the usual cash grab we see lobbed at superstar albums. This one is built different. So let's open up the paperwork and walk through it line by line, the way it deserves. The case is Brewer versus Axel Morgan, filed in the United States District Court for the Central District of California. The complaint introduces Brewer as a hip-hop artist, songwriter, and vocal performer out of Miami, Florida, and Morgan as a songwriter and producer based in Los Angeles. Standard stuff. But then the filing gets to the section titled General Allegations, and this is where the temperature in the room starts to rise. The complaint states that this entire action arises from Brewer's joint authorship and ownership interest in writing Roller Coaster, and from Morgan's subsequent exploitation of that work without recognizing Brewer's authorship and without accounting to Brewer for his share of the money. Exploitation. That is the word they chose, and it is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Then the filing takes us inside the session. In or about April 2012, Brewer wrote and recorded lyrics and made substantial creative contributions to the work at his personal studio in Los Angeles, using his own recording equipment, in collaboration with Morgan. During that session, the complaint says, Brewer wrote and performed original lyrics, recorded original vocals, and provided creative direction concerning the musical composition, instrumentation, emotional atmosphere, arrangement, and overall sound and direction of the work. And then comes the sentence that tells you these lawyers knew exactly what fight they were preparing for. The complaint states that Brewer's contributions were not merely ideas, suggestions, concepts, or directions, they were translated into fixed expression. Original lyrics. Original vocal performances. Recorded. Captured. Frozen in audio. Why does that sentence matter so much? Because in copyright law, ideas are worthless. You cannot own an idea. You cannot own a vibe, a concept, a suggestion shouted across the studio. You can only own expression that is fixed in a tangible medium. The second your voice hits a recording, it becomes property. And this complaint is screaming from the mountaintop. His voice hit the recording, and we can prove it. And how do they plan to prove it? Stems. The original audio stems from that April 2012 session. According to the filing, Brewer retained the original studio stems, and those stems contain embedded date and time information showing exactly when the recordings were created. Now, for anybody who does not speak studio, stems are the separated building blocks of a song, the isolated vocal track, the isolated drums, the isolated instruments, the raw materials that exist before everything gets baked together into the final mix. If those stems are authentic, and if the metadata really does date them to the spring of 2012, that is contemporaneous evidence. That is not a memory. That is not a he said. That is a time machine. And that is what separates this lawsuit from 90% of the copyright claims that get laughed out of the conversation before they ever get read. The filing goes on to say that Brewer also participated in a later mixing session, during which his contributions to the work were incorporated into the recording that would ultimately become associated with Mad City. Read that again slowly. The claim is not just that he made a song over the same beat. The claim is that he was present as his material was folded into the recording pipeline that fed directly into Kendrick Lamar's album. And then the timeline gets laid out like dominoes. May 15, 2012, Writing Roller Coaster is posted publicly on SoundCloud. October 22, 2012, Kendrick Lamar releases Good Kid, Mad City, and The World Changes. October 28, 2012, 6 days after the album drops, Brewer registers Riding Roller Coaster with the United States Copyright Office. And that registration, attached to the complaint as an exhibit, lists Milan Brewer as the author and the copyright claimant, with the year of completion marked 2012 and the date of first publication marked May of that year. Now let me be fair and let me be critical at the same time, because both can be true. Registering that copyright was a smart move. Most artists never do it at all. But registering it 6 days after the album was already in stores? That is closing the barn door after the horse has not only left, the horse has gone triple platinum. If you believe your voice and your writing are sitting inside a record on the most anticipated rap album of the year, you want that registration stamped before release day, not after. Still, a late registration beats no registration every day of the week, and the filing makes a critical point here. Registering the work did not transfer anything to Morgan. Brewer never signed an agreement naming Morgan the exclusive author. He never assigned his ownership away. He never relinquished anything. On paper, according to this complaint, Milan Brewer walked into 2012 as a co-author of Riding Roller Coaster, and nothing that has happened since has legally changed that. Then comes the forensic claim, and this is the sentence in the filing that should make every producer in Los Angeles sit quietly for a moment. The plaintiff states that he is informed and believes that forensic audio analysis confirms that Mad City contains his original vocal performance, his lyrics, and other contributions from the work. Forensic audio analysis. That means experts with spectral tools comparing waveforms, matching vocal fingerprints, measuring the chopped and screwed texture underneath Kendrick Lamar against the original Riding Roller Coaster stems. If that analysis holds up under cross-examination, this case stops being a story and starts being arithmetic. And now we arrive at the money section, because it was always going to be about the money. The complaint alleges that Morgan and his business partner, Richie Rira, represented themselves to third parties as possessing rights in the work and then sold, licensed, transferred, or otherwise authorized its exploitation, including its incorporation into Mad City. And as producers, they got paid the way producers get paid. Understand the economics here, because this is the part casual fans never see. When a producer places a record on a major album, there is typically an upfront advance. For a placement like that in that era, you are probably talking somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $20,000 on the front end. Then come the royalties. Then, potentially, points on the album, depending on the deal. Then the publishing income, which never stops, because a producer's composition is itself a copyrighted work. Morgan received a songwriting credit on Mad City. Rira received a songwriting credit on Mad City. Brewer received nothing. No credit. No share. No check. And the complaint is explicit. Brewer never signed any agreement assigning, transferring, relinquishing, or surrendering his authorship or ownership. His absence from the credits, the filing says, was not the result of any deal he made. It was simply a door that got closed on him. But here is where this case transforms from a sad old story into a live legal war, because this is where the 14-year question gets its answer. And I need you to lock in, because this is the most important legal architecture in the entire filing. The defense you would expect is obvious. Statute of limitations. Copyright claims generally carry a 3-year clock. 14 years should be dead on arrival. Case dismissed. Everybody go home. But the complaint is built to survive that exact attack, and the weapon it uses is a doctrine that turns on one magic phrase, plain and express repudiation. Here's the logic. Between co-owners of a copyright, the clock does not start ticking when the exploitation happens. The clock starts when one co-owner plainly and expressly repudiates the other's ownership, when they look you in the eye and say, clearly and unmistakably, you own nothing, and I will never recognize your claim. And according to this filing, that moment did not happen in 2012. It did not happen in 2015 or 2020 or 2024. According to Brewer, the first plain and express repudiation of his ownership arrived on April 16, 2026. This year. And if a judge accepts that framing, this 14-year-old claim is not late at all. It is right on time. That is either surgical lawyering or the most convenient timeline ever typed into a complaint, and we are about to find out which. So what actually happened between these two men across all those years? According to the filing, they talked. That is the part that jumps off the page at me. The complaint says Morgan agreed that Brewer had contributed to and co-authored the work, and that because of that shared understanding, the two continued to discuss a potential resolution for years, including, at one point, Morgan suggesting a possible financial buyout of Brewer's interest. A buyout. Meaning Morgan allegedly floated the idea of paying Brewer a flat fee to make the whole issue disappear. And let me just say this out loud, because somebody has to. If a man offers to buy you out of your ownership, that man is telling you with his wallet that you own something. You do not offer to purchase a claim you believe is fiction. Now, the filing never says a buyout happened. No money changed hands. No agreement was signed. The talks just drifted. And Brewer, according to the complaint, kept seeking recognition, kept asking about splits, kept asking about revenue, kept trying to resolve the dispute without litigation, and Morgan, critically, never said the words that would have started the legal clock. He never plainly and expressly told Brewer he had nothing. Then the temperature drops. Beginning around October 2025, Brewer finally retains counsel. On or about October 27th of last year, his attorney contacts Morgan, business partner Richie Rira, and the record label that released Mad City, and yes, we are talking about the Interscope family here, seeking to resolve the matter without a lawsuit. And on April 16, 2026, Brewer's attorney gets on a telephone conference with a lawyer named Leon Marabia, counsel advising Rira. And on that call, according to the complaint, Marabia expressly stated that Morgan and Rira rejected Brewer's claim of authorship and co-ownership. There it is. That is the repudiation. That is the moment the filing hangs its entire timeline on. The first clear, unequivocal no. 14 years of conversation, and the first hard rejection arrives in April of this year. And then it gets worse for the other side, in a way that honestly made me read the page twice. Because on that very same phone call, after rejecting everything, Marabia allegedly offered to share the splits, the actual percentage breakdown of the writing credits that Morgan and Rira received from Mad City. Think about how strange that is. Your claim is garbage, you own nothing, but sure, let me show you the split sheet. Brewer's attorney followed up. And followed up again. Several emails. Silence. Then, in an email dated April 29, 2026, copied to Morgan himself, Brewer's counsel writes, and I am paraphrasing the legal politeness here, Leon, following up again, you said you would provide the existing splits on Mad City. Can I still expect to receive them? And if not, are you authorized to accept service of a lawsuit on behalf of your clients? And the response from Morgan's camp was the loudest sound in this entire case. Nothing. No reply. No splits. No engagement. Ghosted straight into a federal courtroom. And legally, that silence matters, because the complaint argues that the refusal to re-engage after that call showed Morgan had no intention of ever backing off the rejection, which locks in April 2026 as the moment the dispute became real, ripe, and fileable. 14 years to get to the courthouse, and the argument is that the courthouse door only truly opened 4 months ago. To understand why this lawsuit matters far beyond one man's missing royalty check, you have to understand what Good Kid, Mad City became after October of 2012. This was not just a successful album. This was Kendrick Lamar's major label debut, the record that turned a Compton prodigy into the defining rapper of his generation, and it has gone on to become one of the longest charting albums in the entire history of the Billboard 200. A hip-hop record that simply refused to leave the charts for nearly 14 consecutive years. Wrap your head around that. There are teenagers discovering Kendrick Lamar right now who were not alive when this album came out. And sitting at the very center of the tracklist, the record's detonation point, is Mad City, the beat switch monster with the burger stand opening that rap fans can recite from memory. This is not a dispute over some forgotten deep cut on a forgotten project. This is a dispute over a piece of the architecture of a monument. Which means every percentage point of authorship attached to that song has been quietly generating money, in some form, every single day, for almost a decade and a half. Somebody has been cashing those checks. The lawsuit says it was the wrong somebodies. And context matters here, so let's talk about the ecosystem this all happened inside of. In 2012, Top Dog Entertainment was still in its ascent, Kendrick Lamar was the crowned prince, Schoolboy Q was on deck, and the camp sound was being built by a tight circle of producers, among them THC. The production duo that included Axel Morgan. If you have spent any time reading liner notes from that TDE era, you have seen THC's fingerprints, including on records like Collard Greens. And the studio culture of that moment ran on momentum and trust. Beats got passed around. Voices got recorded. Hooks got chopped up and buried in mixes. And almost nobody in the room wanted to be the guy who killed the energy by pulling out paperwork. That culture built some of the greatest music of the decade. It also built a minefield of unresolved ownership that is still exploding, one lawsuit at a time, all these years later. Riding roller coaster, if this complaint is accurate, is one of those mines, and it just went off in federal court. Meanwhile, the internet has been doing exactly what the internet does. The moment news of this filing started circulating, the timeline split into its usual two warring camps. In one corner, you have people calling Milan Brewer a clout chaser, pointing at his repeated attempts to upload his original record over the years as proof this is about attention, not justice. In the other corner, you have people pointing at the stems, the registration, and the SoundCloud timestamp and saying, very reasonably, that paperwork this old and this specific does not grow on trees. And then, unfortunately, you have the third group, the loudest and the least informed, trying to drag Kendrick Lamar into it, screaming about ghostwriters because they saw the words lawsuit and Mad City in the same headline and never read a single sentence of the complaint. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. Kendrick Lamar is not accused of anything. Kendrick Lamar wrote his verses. Kendrick Lamar is not a defendant. The man is trending because of paperwork he has nothing to do with, over a session that happened before he ever recorded a note of that album. And, honestly, that might be the most 2026 part of this whole story. The loudest discourse is about the one person the lawsuit explicitly does not touch. Now, let's go deeper on the money, because the accounting request buried in this filing is the sleeper issue that could make this case genuinely historic. Think about every revenue stream Mad City has fed for 14 years. Streaming royalties every single day, across every platform on Earth. Publishing income that never sleeps. Sync licensing. This record has been placed in television and film repeatedly, and I remember hearing it in an episode of Reasonable Doubt not that long ago, because a record that cinematic never stops getting licensed. And then there is the performance side. Every time Kendrick Lamar steps on a stage and performs Mad City, and he has performed it constantly, from arena runs to the Grand National Tour medleys in front of stadium crowds, performance royalties flow to the registered writers of that composition. 14 years of stages. 14 years of placements. 14 years of streams. If Brewer's claim is real, then every one of those payments was calculated on a split sheet with his name missing, and the accounting he is demanding would force every dollar of it into the light. The advances, the royalty statements, the publishing income. All of it traced from 2012 to today. That is not a polite request. In discovery, that is a subpoena-powered excavation. And do not think the defense has nothing to say. They have plays to run, and we should walk through them honestly. Morgan's side will almost certainly attack on three fronts. First, the statute of limitations. They will argue that leaving Brewer's name off a platinum album's credits in 2012 was itself a plain and express repudiation, that the absence of credit, combined with 14 years of open, public exploitation, told him everything he needed to know more than a decade ago. That is a real argument, and judges have accepted versions of it before. Second, they can attack the joint authorship claim itself, argue that whatever Brewer contributed did not rise to the level of co-authorship, or challenge the authenticity and the chain of custody of those stems. Third, they can settle quietly and make the whole thing disappear, which, if we are being honest about how the music business handles its messes, is exactly how stories like this usually end. But here is what makes this filing different from the usual noise, the buyout allegation. If there is an email, a text message, or a witness confirming that Morgan once offered to pay Brewer for his interest, that single fact reframes everything, because you do not negotiate to buy something you insist the other man never owned. Now let's talk about what Brewer is actually asking the court for, because the prayer for relief in this filing reads like a man trying to rewind a decade and a half of his life. First, a declaratory judgment. He wants a federal court to formally declare that he is a joint author and co-owner of Riding Roller Coaster. Second, he wants the court to determine the size of his undivided ownership interest. Third, and this is the one that would echo through history, he wants a declaration that he is entitled to the same writing credit on Mad City that Morgan received. If that happens, the credits of one of the most celebrated albums ever made get rewritten. A new name gets etched into Mad City forever. And fourth, the big one, a full and complete accounting. Every advance, every royalty check, every licensing fee, every publishing dollar, every piece of consideration that flowed to Morgan from this record, opened up and laid on the table, so Brewer's proportionate share can be calculated. Plus prejudgment and post-judgment interest, because 14 years of waiting apparently has a carrying cost. And on top of that, He wants his attorney's fees covered. The complaint was officially filed on August 11th. This thing is fresh. This thing is live. Now, let me answer the question the whole timeline has been building toward. What does this mean for Kendrick Lamar? Directly? Nothing. Kendrick Lamar is not a defendant, is not accused of wrongdoing, and based on the structure of this complaint, Kendrick Lamar's own money is almost certainly insulated. If Brewer wins, the slice he receives comes out of the producer's side of the pie. Morgan's share gets divided down, not Kendrick Lamar's. The voice on the record, the paperwork trail, the session history, none of it touches the man who wrote and performed the verses that made Mad City immortal. And can we please kill the dumbest take on the internet before it grows legs? I have already seen people on social media screaming that this proves Kendrick Lamar had ghostwriters. That is not what this is. Not even close. This is a vocal sample, a chopped and screwed texture created in a session that happened before Kendrick Lamar ever heard the beat. The producer kept a piece of it in the mix. That is a production and authorship dispute between the men who built the track, not a writing scandal about the man who rapped over it. Every bar you hear Kendrick Lamar spit on that record is Kendrick Lamar. Do not let the timeline goblins tell you otherwise. So let's get to the music itself, because this is where the case stops being paperwork and starts being something you can hear with your own ears. Brewer has tried to release his original version of Riding Roller Coaster for years. It has been uploaded to SoundCloud, to YouTube, to streaming platforms again and again and again and again. It has been knocked down, which makes sense, because it is built on a beat that now belongs to one of the most valuable catalogs in music. But a version survives on YouTube under his old name, M. Breeze, uploaded back in 2019, titled as the original Mad City. And when you listen to it, there it is. The exact vocal phrase. Choked out, cloud smoked, screwed down, the same voice you hear floating underneath Kendrick Lamar in the second half of the record, right around the burger stand sequence, that haunting texture drifting behind the verses like smoke in the room. Side by side, it is not subtle. It is not a coincidence of tone. If what we are hearing is what the lawsuit says we are hearing, then Milan Brewer's voice has been pressed into millions of copies of a classic album, performed in front of festival crowds, streamed into the billions, while the man himself sat outside the credits looking in. And I keep circling back to the one thing I cannot shake. 14 years. If I hear my voice on one of the biggest albums on the planet, I am on the phone that week. Not in 2026. That week. Brewer registered his copyright 6 days after the album dropped, so he knew. He knew immediately. And then what? Conversations. Buyout talk that never became money. Years of uploading his version and watching it get claimed and deleted. Now, to be fair to the man, the filing paints a picture of someone actively trying to resolve this without lawyers, and of a producer who kept the door open just enough to keep him waiting. Dangling resolution is one of the oldest tricks in this business. Keep the man hopeful, keep him talking, keep him thinking a check is coming next quarter, and let the years do the rest. If that is what happened here, it is cold. And if that is not what happened, then the question swings back around to Brewer. Brother, what took you so long? Because here is the brutal math nobody wants to say out loud. Even if he wins, even if he gets the credit, gets added to the splits, gets his accounting, the golden age of this record's earning power is behind it. The biggest checks were written in the first 5 years. The advance is long spent. What remains is the tail. Streaming, licensing, the sync placements, and to be fair, Mad City still gets placed in television and film. It still gets performed, and every time Kendrick Lamar performs that record on a stadium stage, performance royalties flow to the writers. There is still real money moving through the song. But the fortune? The fortune sailed years ago. The victory here would be about the name, the credit, and whatever slice of the tail is left. And there is one more wrinkle sitting quietly inside this complaint that deserves its own spotlight, because it tells you exactly what kind of fight Brewer's legal team thinks they are in. The filing makes a point of noting that when Brewer registered Riding Roller Coaster with the Copyright Office in October of 2012, he listed himself as the sole author and claimant, with no producers named on the registration at all. Now, his lawyers frame that as protection. He never transferred anything to Morgan, never signed Morgan on as exclusive owner, never surrendered a thing. But you can bet the defense will swing that same fact back like a bat. If this was truly a joint work, why did you tell the United States government you were the only author? Why is Axel Morgan's name nowhere on a copyright you now say he co-created? It is a double-edged exhibit, and both sides are going to try to draw blood with it. Whoever handles that exhibit better in front of a judge may walk out with the case. And zoom out for a second. because this case is bigger than one Miami artist and one LA producer. This is a warning shot for the entire producer economy. How many beats from that era were built in rooms with 3 or 4 people contributing, and only one name walked out with the credit? How many vocal textures, background layers, and chopped samples on classic albums belong to people who never signed anything and never got anything? The studio culture of that era ran on handshake energy. Nobody wanted to kill the vibe with paperwork. Nobody wanted to be the difficult guy in the room when a placement was on the line. And the dirty secret of the music business is that the vibe is exactly what the paperwork was for. Brewer's mistake, if you can call it that, was trusting the relationship. Morgan's vulnerability, if the allegations hold, is that stems do not forget, metadata does not lie, and a chopped vocal does not change its fingerprint just because 14 years passed. Keep your stems. Register early. Get the split sheet signed before anybody leaves the room. That is the sermon this lawsuit is preaching to every young producer and artist watching right now. So here's where we land. A federal court is now holding a case with dated stems, a 2012 copyright registration, a SoundCloud upload that predates the album, a forensic audio claim, an alleged buyout conversation, a documented rejection call from April of this year, and a paper trail of follow-up emails that were met with total silence. That is not nothing. Whatever you think about the 14-year wait, and I have told you exactly what I think about it, the underlying claim is one of the more credible authorship disputes I have read in a long time, and if it survives the statute of limitations fight, the discovery phase alone could crack open the accounting on a record that has generated money every single day for nearly a decade and a half. The ghost in the mix finally has a case number. Now I need to hear from you, because this one is going to split the room. Question 1. After hearing the timeline, the SoundCloud upload, the registration, the stems, do you believe Milan Brewer is a wronged co-author who got strung along for 14 years, or a man who slept on his own claim until the money looked worth chasing? Question 2. If his voice really is the chopped and screwed texture under Kendrick Lamar on Mad City, does he deserve the same writing credit as the producers, or is a background sample a different category of contribution? And question 3. The one I am most curious about, if you found out tomorrow that your voice was sitting inside a classic album, how long would you wait before you lawyered up? Because I promise you my answer is measured in hours, not decades. Drop every single thought in the comments, respectfully, and let the debate breathe. And if this is your first time on the channel, you already know what to do. Hit the subscribe button, tap the bell, and join the family, because we do not just cover the headlines here, we read the paperwork. Like the video if you learned something, share it with somebody who still thinks the music business runs on talent alone. And before you go, if you thought the business behind Mad City was messy, wait until you hear what is happening behind the scenes of the next Kendrick Lamar era, because the reports around the new album are getting louder by the day, and the people trying to control that narrative are telling on themselves in ways you would not believe. That story is waiting for you right now. I will see you over there. Be good out there. Peace.